And I'm looking forward to this spot. He's one of the great authors, Hampton Sides. He obviously wrote a book on a Great West, Kingdom of Ice. The wonderful book, Ghost Soldiers, and one of the best books I've ever read, Hellhound on His Trail. This is today the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. So I said to Eddie, Eddie, you know what? I don't know if we can get Hampton that quick. I should have thought of this a couple days ago. My fault. And believe it or not, Hampton said, you know what? Let's do it. So there you go. We have a chance to chat with one of the great American authors who says hello. Hampton, nice to talk again. Christopher Russo, how are you today? Okay.
Hey, good to be back with you guys.
Good to have you aboard, Hampton. And this is a sad day in American history. And what a book you wrote. We all remember Hellhound on His Trail. I want to really center on Ray and King in this little segment with you and talk about that day. And let's first start with the reason why Martin Luther was in Memphis with that garbage strike. Let's go there first. Go ahead.
Yeah, a sad day for the country. It's a sad day for my hometown. I was born and raised in Memphis, and of course this is the most pivotal moment, I think, in the history of Memphis, and that's why you're getting so much coverage out of Memphis today and so much that the city is still reckoning with. King came to Memphis on behalf of the garbage workers, the sanitation workers who were striking. They were striking for actually very, very small things they were really asking for, very, very reasonable things they were asking for. But we had a very bullish mayor, Henry Loeb, at the time, and he was not going to budge, and it was an impasse. And King came to march, and of course, history was stalking him in the form of James Earl Ray, who had been following King for about a month, had moved actually from Los Angeles to Atlanta, and had bought a gun, bought a scope, bought this ammunition, and was moving around wherever King went, and followed him to Memphis.
Now, he went to Memphis on short notice, did he not, Martin Luther King? Didn't he decide to go late on that week there, Hampton, or is it planned for a long period of time?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. He had marched once before, and about a couple of weeks before, and the march had turned violent because of some local rabble-rousers in Memphis, and so he felt that his tradition of nonviolence required him to come back and prove that he could march in Memphis and make it a peaceful march. So that's why he came back. It was sort of like a do-over, and there was an injunction against it, and that had to be fought. They had just that day won they were fighting this injunction, and they were allowed to march, so they had just kind of had a minor victory there in the courts and were in a celebratory mood. King was about to go out to dinner to kind of to celebrate this court victory and in anticipation of the march that was going to happen in a few days, when a shot rung out in the Memphis night and changed everything.
Now, he is really a sitting duck. Really, this whole period here, you're not talking about a guy. He didn't have a bodyguard, right? He didn't have a lot of people with security. He wanted to be out in the people. This is not somebody who was difficult to get if you wanted to get. Is that correct?
I think that's fair to say. I think many people now think, how in the world did some loser like James Earl Ray get to King so easily? But people forget. He did not have a bodyguard. He was an apostle of nonviolence. He would not let any of his entourage carry weapons. And they were incredibly, I would say, almost naive about not shielding his movements, about allowing him to stand up there on the balcony. Any of you, your listeners who've been to Memphis and to the Civil Rights Museum, which is an amazing place, will know that when you stand up on that balcony, you're incredibly exposed from just about all angles. And why someone didn't tell him, get the heck off that thing immediately, as opposed to what happened, which was he stayed up there for 5 or 6 minutes talking with his entourage down in the parking lot. It's is kind of remarkable. And he had also been offered a police detail from the Memphis Police Department, but had turned it down because he figured they'd just be spying on him, which is probably true. So therefore, he really had no protection, and it was quite easy for someone with a scope not very far away in that flop house to take aim.
We'll get to Ray in a minute. Hampton sides. Now, I'm sure it was Memphis at that time wasn't as renowned as a rough town for blacks as, say, Birmingham was, maybe to a certain degree Montgomery, Alabama, Atlanta. Was it on that level of, I guess it was, of animosity towards blacks in 1968?
Well, I think the people, certainly white folks in Memphis, thought that Memphis had, didn't really have a race problem. They thought that they had escaped the major headlines of Little Rock and Birmingham and elsewhere. But obviously, we did have a race problem and an economic problem that sort of overlays that. And a perfect illustration of that was the sanitation workers' strike. These were folks who were, at the kind of lowest level, lowest echelon of the socioeconomic ladder. And it was a rough town, but it was also a town that has this very rich and very interesting musical tradition.
Well, Elvis Presley, you can't get better than that, right?
Elvis Presley, but Stax Records and Sun Studios, and so much of that great music coming out of Memphis was all about, in effect, musical integration. It was about black and white musical forms mingling, and it was a really interesting, socially, it was a very interesting environment. But this other problem was simmering and of course came to a full boil in the weeks leading up to the assassination. And
King was one of those who would show up at churches, right, for even unscheduled speeches at like 8, 9 o'clock before he had dinner, and do a tremendous 20-minute, 30-minute, 45-minute speech to churches, and he did that in Memphis that week. Did he not, there, Hampton, or not?
He did. His various advisors and aides, kind of hated him because he was constantly changing the schedule and doing things impromptu and staying up all night, all hours of the night, strategizing. They said that he had a war on sleep. They didn't get to sleep a whole lot, and he would just show up for speeches. And of course, the night before he was killed, he gave this amazing speech in Memphis, the mountaintop speech, which of course has been quoted today on the media just 24/7. It seems to indicate that he knew something was going to happen. At least that's the the inference that you gather from hearing the speech. In fact, it was a speech that he had given iterations of for over a year, when he talked about the mountaintop and talking about maybe he's not going to get there with you. He certainly thought about his own death a lot. He got death threats almost daily, and I'm sure he was in his own mind just trying to deal with that. But it is a mistake to think that he had predicted that he would die the next day. This was a form of a speech that he'd been given for a long time. All
right, Ray, who, as you said, he was a drifter, jail, escaped. Terrible family, the whole 9 yards. Stalked King for a long period of time, and he really probably had a chance to kill him long before this night in '68. Did he not?
He, when he had moved to Atlanta, he had checked into a kind of a flop house, not too dissimilar from the one he checked into in Memphis. And he went to King's house and marked it on a map, and he went to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference offices and marked it on a map, and the church where King was a pastor and marked it on a map. And then he went to Birmingham and purchased this .30-06 rifle. He went to Selma when King was giving a talk and just missed him. So yes, he's a drifter. He's a drifter who suddenly seems to have a purpose, and he certainly racially, and that's a big part of trying to understand Ray is what truly motivated him. Certainly, he was a racist. He was a great proponent of George Wallace and his campaign, and had volunteered to work for the campaign out in California. But I think ultimately he was motivated by money, and believed that he would receive one of these bounties that was out there on the head of Martin Luther King. He certainly knew about them. There's some evidence that he got some money from somewhere, and it's possible that he did, all of which leads to the question of conspiracy. I believe there was a kind of a small, crude conspiracy. He seemed to be meeting with people and being on the phone with mysterious folks, and it was never absolutely clear what his connections were. But the notion that this was an extremely sophisticated, extremely well-funded or well-oiled conspiracy is also something that I have trouble with, because he's pretty desperate through these months, both before and after the assassination. He's clearly hunting for money. He's clearly confused about what to do and where to go. This was not there was an element of spontaneity to this. He made a split-second decision to go to Memphis. He happened to catch King on the balcony, and he fired his weapon, and then he ditched his weapon out on South Main. And this is the weapon and the contents of this suitcase are the elements that ultimately lead to his capture.
Which took a long time. How long was he in that flop house before April 8th, April 4th? Was he there 5 days,
Yeah.
6 days? How long was he there?
No, he was only there for 1 day. He checked in. He realized that he had a decent view of the Lorraine, his room 5B. You had to sort of lean your head out the window to see it, but it was at least had a view of the Lorraine. And he immediately went out to a sporting goods store in downtown Memphis and bought a pair of binoculars, and came back and kind of monitored the Lorraine for an hour or two. And then, lo and behold, King came out on the balcony. He went to the bathroom, with a communal bathroom, which was down the hall, which had a better angle, and that's where he.
He shot him from the bath. He shot him from the bathroom, not from his room.
Not from his room.
Wow. Now, Did people know? Did the federal authorities, FBI, local police, did they know about Ray, or is this a guy that was basically blended? He was one of those guys who kind of blended into the woodwork, where you kind of escaped. That was a big theme in your book,
right?
Yeah. So nobody really knew that this was a serious guy that we had to be careful about. Is that correct?
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, he had escaped from the Missouri State Pen a year before, and he certainly was on some various wanted lists for being an escaped fugitive. But he was kind of a nobody. His crimes were, he was a stick-up artist. He had committed a number of armed robberies. He was someone who would rob liquor stores and grocery stores and convenience stores and banks. He later robbed a bank in London. But he wasn't somebody that was high on the list of the FBI. People didn't really, as you said, he tended to blend in with the woodwork wherever he was. He constantly changed his location, changed his name, changed his style, and was constantly getting these different criminal aliases. So he's kind of a hard guy to pin down.
Was he 20 yards away? 50? How far was he from the bathroom to the Lorraine balcony?
I've forgotten the exact number of feet. I've stood in that bathroom, and with a 7-power scope, which is what he had, King's face would have completely filled the viewfinder. It was not a hard shot for anyone who had ever fired a rifle. And Ray, people forget Ray had been in the Army. He'd served in Germany, and he was a marksman. He did know how to fire a gun. He wasn't, he's not any kind of high-tech sniper, but he certainly, it was not a difficult shot.
Is it at dusk? What time of the day was it?
It's just after 6 o'clock. Dusk is about right. It was the sun was setting over the Mississippi River, and it was not a difficult shot in that regard either. There's still plenty of light.
207 feet. We just checked, Hampton.
Okay.
So 200. So that you're right on the button.
Right.
Now, how many people were on that balcony besides King when the gun was fired?
Well, this is one of the interesting things. As time has gone by, more and more people have come forward to, I would say in some cases, I hate to say this, but sort of exaggerate their proximity.
Well, Jesse Jackson is the perfect example, but we'll go to that in a minute.
Jesse Jackson was the ultimate example, and he said that he claimed that King died in his arms, and he wore this bloody shirt on the Today Show the next day, showing that King had died in his arms, and it was completely made up.
Think about that. Here's the guy, Jesse Jackson, who puts blood on a shirt and nowhere near King, and he goes on a Today Show the next day to take advantage of that. I mean, that is an absolute Hampton. That is an absolute disgrace, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, Jackson had quite a career, and I don't have anything against most of the positions he's taken later in life, but he certainly did not acquit himself well on that day. Ralph Abernathy was on the balcony. Andrew Young was on the balcony. And King didn't die, by the way, on the balcony. He died in the hospital about an hour later. And Abernathy was right there at his side the whole time. And, King's advisors all were shocked that Jesse Jackson had taken this position, almost as though he were saying that King had handed over the mantle to him as the new civil rights leader. He was being quite opportunistic, and it's pretty craven, and I think you'll find he often kind of dodges that issue.
Oh, that would drive me crazy. That'd be the first thing I'd ask.
Embarrassed by it.
That'd be the first thing I'd ask him if it was me. That drives me. Now you're right. He died on the operating table. Did he have any chance it was only one shot, was it not?
It was only one shot, but it was a catastrophic wound. I talked to one of the doctors who operated on him. I talked to the person who did the autopsy on him, and it was not a survivable wound. It struck his jaw. It drove down into his neck. It severed arteries. He was in shock. He had lost a tremendous amount of blood.
No consciousness whatsoever?
No consciousness. His eyes were open at first, and there were those at first who thought maybe he was cognizant. It was maybe even trying to say something, but then that was only in the first 30 seconds or so. After that, he lost consciousness.
He did. Now, I hate to say this, but we have to be fair here as a reporter, and you as a journalist. His wife was not with him, but and was it Angela Davis? What was her name? The
Georgia Davis.
Georgia Davis, the senator who he had an affair, who he's had a relationship with. She was with him. She ran to the room, right? And the guy said, "Abernathy, this is not the time. You can't be here." And they sent her away. Is that true? That story, Hampton?
That's
How about
true.
that? Yep.
That's true. It's no secret that King had dalliances and had mistresses, and unfortunately, Georgia Davis, who is an extraordinary woman, she's since passed away since I wrote the book, but she was there in Memphis the night before the assassination, was there during the day, and was obviously distraught and shocked like everyone else, and went up to try to help like everyone else, and was turned away because of the optics of the thing. It just wouldn't look right. So that's certainly an aspect of the story that people don't like to talk about, but it is true.
Dallas took a long time, and a lot of people think the Cowboys had something to do with its recovery, but Dallas took a long time to get rid of this stigma, and that is the city where JFK was assassinated.
Yeah.
How long did it take Memphis to get over the fact that that's the city where Martin Luther King was assassinated?
Well, I mean, in many ways, we're still dealing with it. It was a seismic event that was not only tragic in and of itself, but it had all this racial overtones to it that the city's still dealing with. It's the city on the Mississippi River at the head of the Delta, which is some of the richest cotton growing country in the world, and and has all this racial kind of racially freighted history to deal with. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, was a town hero for a long time, and this past year they pulled down his statue from a park.
Thank God. Gee whiz, thank God.
Things like that. But what's really cool about the way Memphis has dealt with this is that Lorraine Motel. It fell into disrepair. The town fathers considered it an eyesore and an embarrassment and a blemish on our city. But then some other very forward-thinking people said, no, you can't run away from your history. You got to confront it and embrace it even. And so they fixed up the museum, fixed it up, turned it into a museum. It has now become the number one attraction in Memphis. It's a shrine. It's a great museum. It's like the
Dealey Plaza in Dallas, the same kind of deal.
Yeah, but more hopeful in a lot of other ways because it's a place where people come to talk about nonviolence. People come to talk about economic justice. People come to talk about black and white getting along. It has a lot of political and social overtones that I think the place in Dallas doesn't.
Did America stop April 4th, April 5th, or not?
What do you mean, America?
Well, I mean, did schools close? Where we all know there were moments of silence. The games get shut down.
Yeah,
things like that.
First of all, there were the riots. Unbelievable number of riots across the country, including in Washington, D.C. And in some places, schools were closed. Certainly in Memphis, people didn't go out. There was a curfew. My family assumed there was going to be a terrible riot, and my dad, we got in a car and went about 100 miles away to Jackson, Tennessee, and checked into a Holiday Inn. But turned out there really, Memphis was one of the places where there wasn't much rioting. Partly because the National Guard was already there, but partly because I think people heeded King's message. He would have. What would King have said? He would have said, this is not about violence. Don't go out and loot and commit arson and so forth. So Memphis was actually largely spared the sorts of rioting that took place elsewhere.
Since he left the guns, and last thing for Hampton sides, he's got to run. Since he left the guns, basically where he shot King, why did it take 3 or 4 months? And by the way, they got him at Heathrow Airport. I mean, it's not like they got him in downtown Atlanta. I mean,
right.
Why did it take him? Why did it take authorities? It's a massive manhunt. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of infrastructure to protect him. Well,
right.
He doesn't have a ton of money. I mean, right. There's no evidence that he collected money on this. Is that correct?
There's no evidence. I suspect that he hoped to, and he may have at some point, but no evidence that he collected any huge sum.
All right. So how does it take the FBI and Hoover? How does it take him? Essentially, wait to get to another country to get him? Right.
Well, he ditched his weapon on South Main, and literally cops were there within 20 seconds. That's how close it was.
So 20 seconds. They 20 seconds earlier, they would have nailed him right then and there.
They would have nailed him there, but he pulled off in his car, and he drove back roads all the way to Atlanta. And you have to understand, they weren't looking for James Earl Ray. They were looking for somebody named Paul Bridgman. A guy named John Willard. That was another one of his aliases. Then when they got the weapon and traced it back to the sporting goods store in Birmingham, they found that it had been purchased by a guy named Harvey Lohmeyer. And so they're looking for a guy named Harvey Lohmeyer. Well, all these are aliases. They're not real people. And it took them several weeks to sort this all out. By this point, Ray is in Canada. So then they start looking through all the fingerprints of every known fugitive in the United States and comparing those by eyeball with the fingerprints that were found on the rifle. And this took armies of people because this was before the age of computerization. And they finally got a match, and it was fingerprints from a guy who'd escaped from a prison in Missouri named James Earl Ray. So finally, after about 3 weeks, they did know at least the name of the guy, the real name of the guy they were trying to find. But that's why it took so long.
Does this stay? You're in Memphis. You spent a lot of time on this great book. Does this stay still? It resonates with you, does it not, Hampton?
Of course it does. It's a terrible day. It's a tragic day, but it's also a day that, the city has, I think, done a pretty good job in recent years of trying to confront and try to kind of sift through what does it mean and how can we make things better and move forward. So, I'm not usually a big believer in anniversaries. I think this is the kind of stuff we should be thinking about every day, but this is a big one. The 50th is a big one. It's a time to take stock and try to figure out where the city and really where the country is headed.
All right, Hampton, that's a wonderful job. Appreciate all the help. We'll keep in touch. Thanks very much today.
Hey, thank you. Good to be with you.
You got it. Hampton Sides, Hellhound on His Trail, one of the great books. Even Steve liked that one, and one of the great books you ever read.
That's right.
You did like that.
That was fantastic.
Oh, that's a fantastic.
Couldn't put it down.
If you don't read that, that's the best. It's the best book on King and Ray you ever read in your life. And today is the 50th anniversary. Okay, so we wanted to do a little something on that. I would think hope you like little Ron Guidry for you today.
Yeah,
that's up your alley.
Gator
That stuff. That is.
I should have come down and helped both of you with some details because you were both lost at times.
Well,
but that's all right.
Where was I lost?
Just find. You're okay.
I wasn't lost with the Munson thing. They got that wrong. He died on Thursday. The Friday was the day where they kept home plate empty.
That's right.
And Monday was the funeral in which Guidry pitched.
That's correct.
So I did not get that. That's not fair. See, that's you throwing something out there that's not fair.
Look at you getting sensitive.
But am I right or wrong?
After all the times you bat me around.
Ronnie got a little confused there, but I was right. That was the funeral. The day that he pitched is not the same day that they kept home plate empty. I know this, and Steve knows this. You know why Steve knows this? He was at one of the games that weekend at Yankee Stadium.
I was there on Saturday, the second game of the series.
There you were.
Yeah. When Mercer and he had that backwards. He's like, he had a 3-run home run.
Yeah, it hit the double late.
But whatever, it's fine. But it was good.
Something different. And I thought it was 2 days rest. I got that wrong. He said 3. I like to double check that, but he said it was 3. I thought it was 2. The game in Fenway in the playoff game in '78. I thought it was 2. I might be wrong. Now, he said 3, so
I thought he pitched.
He said Thursday. I thought he had pitched on Friday, but I might be wrong.
The weekend series of the Indians, did he pitch Friday night? I don't remember.
We'd have to look that up. I'd ask Eddie too, but no, we'd have to look that up. Anyway, how you doing today? Things good?
Feel good. Nice clean Yankee victory today.
7-1.
7-2.
7-2. Who's your Yankee? Who's your Masters pick?
Oh, I've got several. Can't decide. Just playing along with you. I don't think Tiger's going to win.
I agree.
Danny went through a whole bunch of things today on the show, he's trying to do a low risk, high reward on some gambling.
Oh my God, he is a degenerate.
I don't know about that. He likes to have a little fun.
Well, maybe, but I mean, he's trying to come up with odds to pick up a guy, things like that.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. But what's sort of being overshadowed here is McIlroy's situation. You know what I mean? Don't you think?
100%.
Nobody's talking about it.
Nobody. I think it helps him, as that's what Frank Nobilo said earlier today. Yeah. He kind of lays in the weeds a little bit, which is good. All right. Anything else?
What do you mean, sports-wise?
Well, yeah, we don't have to hear a long update. Give me the scores first off. Let me hear them.
Well, the Yankees completed their win, 7-2 home runs for Stanton, Judge, and Sanchez, and Severino pitched into the 8th inning, so nice, clean victory. Astros win again. Alex Bregman with the tie-breaking RBI single in the 7th.
The Orioles,
I
have the over. Not a good start.
Corey Kluber is pitching very well. Now, has not allowed a hit. Only the 5th inning, but the Indians lead the Angels 1-0. Tigers and Royals postponed because of crappy weather. What else is new? The Braves, they smacked around Max Scherzer today.
Had a 3-run homer in the first inning.
Preston Tucker, 7-1 win over the Nationals. The Mets on top of the Phillies 4-2.
The Facebook game, $35 million.
I guess, I don't know the details, but before I came down here, I was, because I can't watch the game, and I'm not watching it on Facebook, but I was checking on Twitter that I guess another managerial gaffe with the bullpen there for the Phillies.
Oh, I love that, Mr. Kapler, who has been a disaster. Next.
Diamondbacks, Pat Corbin, 9 Ks, 1 hit allowed entering the 7th inning. 3-0 lead over the Dodgers.
Dodgers can't lose enough for me.
They can't score.
All right, anything else?
Charlie Blackmon got a 6-year contract.
I saw
extension.
that middle of the season, or early in the season. Like to see that.
$108 million and a couple of player options.
Very good, nice job.
Ty Lue is coming back for the Cavs Thursday against the.
Boy,
Wizards.
you got a lot of good information today. Anything else?
And you heard about RG3 signing with the Ravens?
I did not. That's news too.
There you go.
There you have it, Mr. Torrey. We continue here on Mad Dog Unleashed.